Hi, everybody. Welcome to the round table with Brian Zimmerman. And I'm Sarah Blessing. And today we're diving into Brian's life, what happened with 9/11, which really helped lead into him joining the Army and then doing this intense training to see if he could be a Green Beret, which is very, very difficult. And I cannot wait to find out. I know a little bit. I cannot wait to find out more about this part of your life. I'm just fascinated, all ears. Thanks for joining us. If you want to hear any of the previous episodes, just look at our Project Next Facebook or YouTube or Instagram and find his other episodes because this is the third one.
Third one.
This is so exciting. Okay, so why don't you summarize just briefly what happened in last week's episode, and then we'll take it from there with 9/11, which was a pretty big event for all of us.
Sure. Yeah. So, I had just graduated from Indiana University, and track was going really well. I was really happy with where I was at. My coach was really happy, and we were gearing up for the potential of being able to go to the trials. I was really close to making the minimum standard in the decathlon. I was really close. And so I had continued to train for that post college. But I had some serious bumps along the way, mainly the breakup with my fiance at the time. We had gone through a really traumatic event together, and I think that had just really sat on both of our shoulders, for the better part of almost 3 years.
And you really kept it to the two of you. You didn't get help from anybody else. So being alone, I would think would add to your stress with that.
Yeah, it was not something that I was really ready to talk to anyone. I don't know that I told anyone about that at that point. So when we broke up, it was in April. So I hadn't graduated yet. I hadn't, things really hadn't started to slow down yet. I was still on that fast moving train. But once that train came to a stop, that was when I really took a nosedive into depression. I would say that's the first time I had ever experienced true depression. Being up all hours of the night, going to bed at 5 o'clock in the morning, waking up at 3 in the afternoon. What do I do now? It was just an aimless existence at that point. I really didn't know what to do. I was taking a break from training. The coach was it's like, listen, you need to come off the pedal for a little bit. You've going at it really hard now. And let's just take a break, take a month, to let your body heal and all that.
Is this senior year?
This was the year I graduated from IU. Yeah, this would have been May 2001.
Okay.
And so I had tried to do that. I'd really tried to stay on track. I knew that I was going to have a job there at Indiana, working for, I believe it was their maintenance department and things like that. I was going to help write up maintenance tickets. And
oh, that's right.
It was an office job. It was a cush job. It paid relatively well. It paid for what I needed it to pay for. And I was still training and getting to train, members of the track team at IU. They wanted me to stay on and keep training and help coach those athletes. So I started to kind of climb out of that depression well, so to speak. And but I wouldn't say it was necessarily healthy.
Right. You maybe picked another obsession or something else to go for instead of knowing how to process what you just went through.
Yeah, no idea how to process what it is that I was going through, and so the party scene, the serial dating scene, just searching for something to hold on to make me feel some sort of connection.
And also, you don't want to be alone in your thoughts too, so you're very busy with things.
Staying busy.
That's something. Yeah. I think a lot of people do that now as a technique. You don't want to be alone in your thoughts, so you're doing other things. Whenever Definitely. I had intense depression in high school, I know everything was dark. Mm-hmm. Like it was just through this dark lens of if this issue, it's like, well, that's not going to work because of this terrible thing.
Right.
That's never going to work because of this. It just clouded every area of my life.
It does.
Yeah.
It really does. And so, once I kind of started climbing out of that well, things got better, but not necessarily in the best way. And so I continued to train. I started coaching a little bit there at IU, and then a significant event happened. And I remember it just like it happened 30 seconds ago. Sitting in the office, I'd just come in and got a cup of coffee and turned the TV on. I always turn the TV on. I sat right in there with my boss and the lady that I worked for, and she would come in and we'd always have coffee in the morning and talk. And I remember her being a little bit late that morning, but I had gone ahead and turned the TV on, and there had been an incident in New York where they had thought that a plane may have run into one of the buildings of the World Trade Center. And I was like, well, and I started going through, well, how do you veer off course? And I'm not a pilot, have never even sat in the cockpit of a plane, but I'm like, how does that happen? And so I'm watching, I'm drinking my coffee, trying to process what it is, how that could have happened, and I was just thinking, somebody's, there's going to be a lot of trouble with this. And about that time, I saw the second plane come in from behind the first building and slam into the second one. And right away, you notice that it's not a small plane. It was definitely a jetliner, a passenger aircraft. And at that point, I thought this is not an accident. This can't be an accident. And so, of course, just like everyone else in America, I was glued to the television that day, listening to the reports of what had happened, what they thought, maybe, where these planes had come from, and then the other aircraft that crashed in the Pentagon, and then there was another one that crashed out in Pennsylvania. And, at the time, I had not experienced anything significant like that on American soil. And so I start running through what is this going to mean for, future generations, for air travel? They shut all aircraft down. I remember looking up at the sky at practice, and it was so strange not to see a contrail, in the sky, not one. And I think I started thinking about the military, thinking that the military was going to be involved in some way. Not that I was going to be involved, but just wondering what the response was going to be. And so once it came out that it was an actual terrorist attack, and that there were teams of special forces individuals, getting ready to go to Afghanistan and link up with the Northern Resistance and do that whole thing. I really started thinking, what, this may be what it is that I'm supposed to do. I had that initial, oh wow, get right down to the recruiting office and sign right up, and I almost did. I almost did that. I was at MEPS, which is where all military personnel who are going in, for me, which was the Army, everyone goes there to do their physical, the paperwork, the shots,
Where is that?
all that. For me, it was in Indianapolis. There's also one down in Louisville, but I was going to the one up in Indianapolis. And so I got up there with my recruiter, Ralph Hughley. Still remember his name, Ralph, if you're out there. Thank you so much. He was just a phenomenal recruiter. And we get up there. I think I've got maybe one signature left. And I remember I had time. I called down and I talked to my dad, and I was like, hey, this is happening. They're going to give me what I want. I think initially I was going to come in on a Ranger contract, so I go to basic training and then immediately go to Ranger Regiment and start that whole process. And I was all gunned up about that. And, I'd seen the movie Black Hawk Down. And so I called and talked to Dad, and he's like, hey, I'm going to support you 100% no matter what you do. But he said, this is a really big decision, and just, maybe come off the gas a little bit and don't let this be an emotional decision. Take a couple months, few months, this war is not going anywhere.
Right.
So
we know how long it lasted.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think a lot of people joined the military after 9/11. I have quite a few friends that did. Mm-hmm. So I think that was really wise of your dad, because people were signing up for emotional reasons. We just witnessed the thing about 9/11 that I don't know whether people realize, that weren't old enough or weren't born yet
Mm-hmm.
to see it, since it was in 2001, is it was on TV. It was on every station except for a few kids ones
Mm-hmm.
for days and days and days.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I watched it for like a week and then I
Mm-hmm.
turned it off,
Yeah.
and then I would dream it. I would dream
Yeah.
about it. I
Mm-hmm.
would dream about being a firefighter looking in the rubble trying to find survivors. And that was
Right.
my brain's way of trying to handle the trauma of what I
Right.
had been seeing,
Mm-hmm.
because we're watching people falling from buildings,
Right.
from the, they'd
Yeah.
rather die that way than the fire, jumping from the buildings.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
we're watching the most horrible things. I was a sophomore at IUS at the time
Mm-hmm.
in a computer class, and I saw people watching stuff out in the hallway, and I thought they were watching Independence Day or something.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then I was very naive
Mm.
as a young college student. I really didn't realize terrorists were a real thing. I thought they were just in Arnold Schwarzenegger movies. Like,
Sure.
I was so naive about it. And I was like,
Yeah.
what? People have been trying for years to hurt us? Like, it was a
Yeah.
big wake up call for me.
Oh, for me too. I mean, I think it was for everyone. I think every American at that point realized how vulnerable their
Yes.
freedom really is.
Right.
It still is very vulnerable, and that caused a very significant emotional response, I believe, and caused a lot of young men and women to say, you know what, I am capable to go defend this country, and that's what I'm going to do. And you always hear, World War II is the greatest generation, to ever come about, and I support that about 90%. When you take a good look at the GWAT generation, I mean, you had people, you had people who were in careers that came out of that career to go join up, and so my hat's off to the GWAT generation that chose to go do that in a time when the country said we need you. There's a great quote from John F. Kennedy, and it's, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And I was very, very proud of my country at that time. So
yeah, patriotism was very, very high. Me too,
mm-hmm.
because I was so unaware. I had taken the freedom for granted, and so I was, became more worldly.
Sure.
Especially countries right. where they were supporting terrorism and these people were trying to destroy America. It was just I was so naive and didn't know about it. So my appreciation for the country, our government, the military,
right.
I think a lot of us, it really went up, and
right.
we had more love for our government instead of just constantly attacking the government and being
sure.
ungrateful.
Sure.
Because they're not perfect. There's mistakes in the government, there's
yeah.
power problems and all kinds of things. But I think we were more thankful after that event that really traumatized a generation. I think ours, especially because we were at the age where we're becoming adults and shaping who we are as humans.
Yeah,
so I think it really did shape us. Yeah. Okay.
So it really did. Yeah, you're absolutely right with that. Yeah. So I did, going back to the MEP station, I ultimately decided to come off the gas pedal and told my recruiter, hey, listen, this is fully an emotional response, what I'm doing right now. Like, I really need to make a conscious decision that this is the path that my life is supposed to take. And he said, Brian, 100%, I support you. And I remember on the way back down here to Corden, we talked a little bit about stuff. And when we got back down here, I once again, I thanked him for being so understanding. And he's like, listen, I know you'll be back. And I was like, okay, just kind of brushing it off. But that's what he said. And he's like, I know you'll be back. You've got my number. Call me when it's time. And it just so happened maybe a month or two later, I got a phone call from him, and it went to on my very first cell phone, flip phone. Yeah, it was great. And he left me a message saying, hey, the Army has started this program that I think that you would be really interested in. I think it would really fit what you're looking for. When you get this, just, give me a call or stop in, and I'd like to chat with you about it. And so I heard that message, and I was like, it hasn't been very long. But what's it going to hurt to just go down and just hear what he has to say? He's never lied to me. He's truthful about everything, and I had heard some real horror stories about recruiters, and that whole thing. So I went in and sat down and talked with him. And that's when he told me about the Army starting what's called the 18 X-ray program. And in the military, for those of you who don't know, your military occupational specialty is preceded by a number. So 19 whatever, 20 whatever, 77 whatever. Well, for the special forces, the number identifier is 18. And so the 18 X-ray, X-ray standing for unknown at that time, because there in the special forces there are multiple different MOSs, but X-ray was the indicator of unknown, because at that time you were not special forces qualified. You had intent to try to become special forces qualified. And so he's going through all of this, talking about that whole process. And it was a 6-year enlistment.
Wow.
Regardless. So if you went into this program and you did not get selected, or you were voluntarily withdrawn, which you basically self-select yourself out, or you were simply told, hey, this is absolutely not for you, it's time for you to go somewhere else.
Right.
So 6 years regardless. And so at the time, if you didn't make it through the program, the needs of the Army was Korea. So you were looking at your first duty station in Korea.
Wow.
And I was like, there is no way that I'm not going to make it through this. I would rather die than.
So you were very confident that you were going to pass this and become a Green Beret, and then you were also like, there's no room for failure. So like the determination, I guess, you had in your mind.
Yeah, I mean, this was that far off thing in the distance that I was aiming towards, in which everything else just went away.
And you were searching for a goal in your life.
That goal.
You needed a goal. You needed a purpose.
Purpose.
And then with your training, you're very smart. You're very athletic. You're very adaptable, driven. Mm-hmm. You have some needs that aren't being met that you're making a goal meet your needs. Mm-hmm. You're the perfect candidate, honestly, to be in this program, and because you were very like, oh, there's no failure. There's no room for failure.
Right.
And like very competitive with yourself, I guess.
Very competitive with myself, but there was also that massive element. This gargantuan crater was about to be filled, and that crater was acceptance, my worth. This is something that I go do, and I become this. There's no one that could ever say you're not worth it, you didn't do it. So again, I was going to do this because I wanted to support my country, but also it was a huge opportunity for me to show people I'm worth it, to validate myself.
I think we all have that inside of us. We all want to have some label to say, listen, you should listen to me and respect me and care about me because I'm this. And we know now you don't need any label. Right. You just be you and be the best version of you can, and you deserve, or you should get love and respect from your family and your friends there. So it makes sense that you found this place after 9/11 with the life you led. And if you don't know about Brian's childhood, I recommend you go back to the first episode of the Roundtable where he gets into he didn't have a typical childhood. He gets adopted. You get adopted into a beautiful, wonderful family. But until then, what you grew up, your first years of life, you did not get the right type of love.
It was difficult. It was difficult.
You were taught to, if you performed a certain way, you got acceptance. And if you didn't, you didn't get it. So And I know a lot of you all listening feel that on some level, whether people meant to do it to you or not. It's just a cultural thing, I think. But you had it to the extreme, I would say.
I would say it went beyond what's normal. If we all know it, I don't know what's normal.
Again, shout out to
I don't think that was it.
Shout out to the Zimmerman family. Again, I'm so grateful that they adopted my friend Brian, because otherwise I would be learning all this stuff from you. Okay.
Yeah.
So you sign up. About how long is it from like sign in this 6-year commitment? You're going to try out for the Green Berets, which is very difficult. and
Right.
try out for this new type of program because of
Mm-hmm.
9/11.
Mm-hmm.
How long was it from signing it to did you go to like basic training?
So I signed the initial contract in March of 2003, which put me on the delayed entry program. And so I got on the bus, I got on the plane to fly down to Georgia in June. I think it would have been June 19th of 2003. Got down there, went to the 30th AG. That's one of those places where if you know, you know, but it's where every infantryman's uh, journey begins.
Oh wow.
So through the 18 X-ray program, I went through infantry basic training, which is down in Fort Benning, Georgia. I was at 30th AG where you do the same thing as MEPS. You know, you get the same shots you got at MEPS. You get the same physically, all the same stuff. You're in a, I don't know, an 80-man bunk room, you know, bathroom. You're not allowed to go anywhere, do anything. They've already started the whole
I feel like I've seen those on
PT
movies.
thing. Yeah, it's not quite as dramatic as what you would see in, say, uh, I don't know, another other military movies that where they add a whole lot of Hollywood, except for the Marines. You know that it is that bad. My hats off to those men and women. But yeah, so we waited and waited and waited until we were ready to start the next class, which just so happened the next basic training class for me was July 4th, 2003.
Wow, what a
So
day.
it's pretty interesting way to start July 4th.
So you actually, you wanted to sign up right pretty quickly after nine
Mm-hmm.
eleven, but you actually ended up waiting quite a
Yes.
while.
Yeah.
And that gives like, I could see the war is starting.
Mm-hmm.
They're figuring out the way they're going to handle this.
Yes.
I could
Yes.
see that influencing, like when you did go on missions, they
Mm-hmm.
probably know a little bit more of what to do because
It,
you joined, you're getting
yeah.
involved a couple years after 9/11 now, which I didn't realize.
Yeah. 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 It was. They knew that it was going to be. The government knew that it was going to be a special operations war, and it was for a while. But they knew that they were going to have more special operations personnel in order for this to what they thought would end quickly. And so my initial class that came in, I think there were 200 of us or so that came in, went through basic training. You know, we lost a handful in basic training because they realized that this wasn't like playing Halo or something like that. After 11 weeks at basic training, and AIT, from there, and I think we graduate on Friday, and on Monday we started airborne school, right away.
So airborne school is learning how
Mm-hmm.
to jump out of a plane.
Learning how to jump out of a plane. So we go and do that. Maybe lose a couple there, but the broken ankles, things like that.
Oh wow.
It's landing, under a parachute, specifically that kind of parachute can be, if you don't do it correctly, you're going to bang yourself up. So 3 weeks later, graduated airborne school.
Wow.
And then from there,
were you scared the first time you jumped out of a plane? We're gonna have to do a whole episode
Mhm.
on the jumping out of planes, just so you
Yeah.
know. But
Yeah.
was it pretty scary your first time?
Definitely it was, but it was also it was just one more way for me to prove,
Like, let's do it. Whatever. I don't care if I'm terrified. I'm doing it. Right.
I was in the best physical shape of my life, what I thought was the best mental shape of my life. So yeah, it was scary, but I also,
you didn't
thousands
care.
of people had done it before me.
You didn't care that it was scary. You were going to do it no matter what.
Yeah. I was able to put the fear aside and realize this is what I need to be able to do. And little did I know that jumping out of airplanes was going to become a very significant part of my military career. So, yeah, 3 weeks later, graduated. That weekend, uh, 4 days later, we were required to report to Fort Bragg at this little rundown World War II barracks area where they were going to conduct what's called Special Operations Preparation and Conditioning, which was 4 weeks long. And like we were kind of in purgatory for 2 weeks because we were waiting for our class to start. There was the initial class of these guys of 18 X-rays were in front of us. And so they were finishing up And then once they pushed off to selection, we would be able to move up, go through SOPC and do that whole thing.
What's SOPC?
Special Operations Preparation and Conditioning.
How many people were in your training group at this time when you're jumping out of an airplane?
So jumping out of an airplane, I think we had lost, I don't know, maybe 50 or 60 or so. But then once we got to Fort Bragg, you know, we had multiple people roll over from the first class into our class, you know, whether it was because of injury or getting sick or whatever. So we ended up with right around, I would say 190, 200 people there at that SOPC class. And so we started SOPC, I believe it was, it was right after Thanksgiving, 2003. And to say that SOPC at that time was, it was, I would say, brutal. I think there were a lot of people showed up and they had no idea
how hard
it was going to be.
I want details. I want to know how it was hard.
It was, I mean, it was like cramming Ranger School into 4 weeks. Very, very regimented, very, very loud in their communication with you on how to do
a
lot of that, a lot of mass punishment, a lot of
one person messes up, everybody does push-ups, that type of thing.
There was no such thing as one person, you know, you screw up and then it's
so it really puts the pressure on the individual to not be the person that screwed up, that makes everybody pay. I get, they're really trying to pit you against each other and put you as one.
They want to see it. They also had an enormous amount to teach us, you know, prior to going to selection. And you know, most people who go to Special Forces assessment and selection have anywhere from 8 to 12 years in the Army. And that's not just anybody, you know, that is people who have proven themselves. Their units sign off on sending this guy, because if he goes there and screws up, it's a bad representation of that unit. So they send their cream of the crop. They don't like to, of course they want to keep them, but if they're going to go do it, you know, be successful, represent this unit. And so the learning curve for all of us in SOPC, who had about 5 minutes in the actual Army, you know, literally, you know, it was extremely, extremely steep. And so
this is sort of a new training program because of 9/11. You're trying to accelerate Special Forces training to get more Special Forces into the war to stop terror as soon as possible.
Right.
So they probably took your type of training and it was spaced out for other people, and they had years and years of military training before.
Correct.
And they're just speeding it. They're seeing basically how fast can they cram all this info down, and can you handle it? And if you can handle it, then maybe you are equipped to be in Special Forces.
Right. It essentially came down to, if you didn't learn it the first go around, you're lost.
Wow.
You know, I mean, it's like learning algebra in the morning, and then algebra 2 was coming in the afternoon. And then calculus was the next day, and physics was in the. I mean, it literally it was, and to add on top of that, you know, the physical hardships that we were going through.
So it's not just, I think people a lot of times just kind of think of the physical training, the push-ups and the running, and then you better listen to us and put your uniform on right and make your bed right. But you're saying there was all this book training, all of these that I don't think we regular people not in the military realize.
And it was excellent training. I mean, you learned it in the classroom, then you go out and do it. You know, and the instructors that were there, I think most of them really cared about being there. I would say there were a handful who were selected to go do this, and they absolutely did not want to be there teaching these guys.
So they probably were more terrible to the soldiers?
I'll just say that at that time in the military, there weren't stress cards. There was no even an idea of a stress card.
What do you mean by stress card?
A stress card is now in the military in basic training. If you're feeling wildly overwhelmed, you can put up a card and say, I need a break, or something like that.
That is
That
nice.
may be,
So this is before that.
This is way before.
So they didn't care if you were super
No,
stressed out.
no, they
Okay.
wanted you to quit.
Do you remember your feelings during this intense time? Were you just very goal centered? I'm going to be the best possible, or did you ever let fear creep in? Maybe I can't handle it.
Yeah, no, for me, because of my background in track and field, there up to that point, even in high school, we had 400 days, and that's all we did. You run a 455 seconds, jog a lap, come back and do that. And I can't remember how many. Maybe we did 10 of those, like every other week or something, and then push that into college training. So the physical aspect of it, I truly believe, because that was not, my body was ready for that kind of physical stress. It allowed me to concentrate more on what it was I needed to learn, to ingest, skills wise, that I didn't have at the time. So I think that was I know that was a main area where so many of the guys who didn't make it, uh, their bodies just could not handle the level of physical stress that was being.
And you might not have been able to handle it had you not been this incredible athlete doing this from a young age.
Right.
Pushing yourself to the limit, having good coaches at IU Bloomington.
Yeah. And my dad.
And then also it was really hard for you to study at the beginning, but during college you figured out how to study. So by the time you graduated, you did well. So you did have these tools along with this incredible drive most humans don't have. I understand why you're made it out.
It was, and I wouldn't, during SOP-C, there was never a time where I thought, I can't handle this. I can't. I never had that thought. Now I did look around and I saw guys. I mean, and what I would really like people to know is that when I say the GWAT generation is one of the greatest generations, we had people in that SOP-C class who were physicians, who were lawyers, who were engineer executives from Microsoft, who saw what happened and they said, no, that I need to go serve my country. That you had those kind of people there. And when they were not allowed to move forward to go to selection, they went to the needs of the Army and they served their country.
Wow.
And then once they got out, were able to go back to their life. But those are the kind of people that joined after 9/11.
And to have both the mental ability for the book training and the physical stuff, I would imagine a lot of people were better at one and not the other, but you're good at both. So that's good.
Yeah, because I had to be a student athlete.
Right.
And I stress student athlete because that's the way it should be, I believe.
Student
I
first,
had to
athlete
know
second.
Yes,
What you mean? Yeah.
Yes. I had to know how to do both. And so when SOP-C, at the end of those 4 weeks, we got the weekends off, and I say off, I mean sort of, but at the end of that 4 weeks, before we left to go home for Christmas break, there were, I believe there were about 30 or 32 out of that initial 200, 190, 200 that were told, you have checked all the blocks to go to selection, to Special Forces assessment and selection. And so it was a Christmas break that year was I was home, but I really wasn't
You
home.
were thinking.
Right, because my selection date was January 6th, 2004. Wow. And it was, I remember it went really fast. I don't feel like it was really a break. I know that my body recovered, but then we come back and we gear up to go out to Camp McCall and Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and that's where all the Special Forces training, selection takes place and all that.
Okay, I have a question. So while you're going through this and then you're going home to your family, have you learned to open up to them at all? Were you able to tell them what training was like? Were you able to express how you felt with doing that? Do you remember?
I remember, and I was married to my first wife at the time, and I don't really remember talking about it a whole lot, and what made it really easy to not have to talk about it a lot was the people who heard, oh, Brian's going into, special forces training, blah, blah, blah. So they would come up to me and be like, hey, so I hear you're doing this, and I know you can't say a whole lot about it.
Oh, okay.
So that was my out, where I was just like, well, yeah,
Yep,
it's hard, and it's hard, yeah, it's tough. And that's just kind of where I would.
And you probably didn't want to talk about it.
Not really, because how would they even understand what was, what I would consider the brutality of SOPSI. We're crying out loud. It was.
I see a lot of parallels with like police officers today who see a lot of trauma on an almost daily basis. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they see trauma and then they just immediately go to the next thing, the next call.
Right.
And right. I think they come home and their families say, how was your day? And they say, fine, because they don't want to put that on other people.
Yeah.
So
they don't want to put it on them, and they don't want to relive it.
I just have a lot of empathy for people whose jobs are doing something so traumatic, mm-hmm. which yours definitely was. Your 19 years or almost 19 years of service, and we're not always given the tools to mentally recover or prepare mm-hmm. for those things, because it takes time to process and you need to talk about it. So
for sure.
Again, I'm just grateful you're here with us today and you're doing as well as you are.
Me too.
With all that you went through.
Me too.
Yeah. Okay, so keep going. So you go through the first set of training and you make the cut?
So at the end of, before Christmas break, they tell the 30 or 32 of us that were told that we were moving forward to selection. They gave us our date, where to be, what time to be there, what to have, uniforms, the whole thing. And then we showed up January 6th, and we did our in-processing at Fort Bragg, on the main part of Fort Bragg. And then we hopped up on the 5-ton trucks and made that drive down Chicken Road to Camp McCall. And I'll never forget, I can still see it to this day, exactly the people that were with me, what I was wearing, my thoughts, what was going through my head. And then we get to Fort Bragg, and I'm expecting we get to Fort Bragg, we've got our duffel bags and all that stuff, our rucksack full of all our stuff. And I'm expecting these wildly excited instructors to come out and start yelling and there was none of that. Everything was very calm. They called our names off. This is where you go. This is your hut that you go to. This is your bed. Go there and wait for further instruction. No yelling, no screaming, no nothing.
So it was a big difference in training.
Oh, it was massive.
You got yelled at. It was very loud.
Massive. Yeah.
And then they're just calmly, here, do this.
Yeah.
Did you like it, or were you just so confused?
It was unexpected. It was unexpected. We just didn't know what to expect.
And that seems like on purpose, because you've told me before that being in special forces, you need to be very adaptable, mm-hmm. very quick to change. Mm-hmm. So this seems like one of the trainings of, okay, things are going to be vastly different for you. Can you handle it?
Yeah.
You have no time to adjust.
I would say that in actuality, that level of calm, the professionalism of the cadre out there, that was our first introduction to, okay, this is kind of how it could be. And so everyone gets off the trucks. We get to our huts and our beds and all that stuff. And they tell us, as you're getting off the truck, they're like, take all instructions from the whiteboard. And and that's literally how we took all instructions. So everyone came in, we got everything set up in our bays, and went and checked on the the whiteboard, and it said, be in PT gear,
physical therapy,
physical fitness. Mm-hmm. You'd be in your physical fitness shirt, bottoms, white socks, and tennis shoes. Very, very detailed to what was,
So the whiteboard had specific instructions, but it wasn't a person yelling at you. Mm-hmm. You went up to the board and read it. I would like that better, I think.
It's different for everyone, but literally they said, take all instruction from the whiteboard, add nothing to, take nothing away. What is on the board is what it is. And that even caused people to be, well, did they mean this? And for me, I was just, well, all I got to do is what's on the whiteboard.
You probably like that. Yeah.
Right time, right place, right. How much easier does it get than that? And so we did. We took the PT test that morning, the physical fitness test.
Was that hard?
No, that's at the time the Army fitness test, maxing it out was it was really how not I'm not going to say a joke, but it was pretty easy
Easy for
for
you.
the people that were there, because they were most people that were there, they were prepared for that. If you didn't score 300, which is the max score on your PT test, or even on the extended scale, you're already way behind the power curve. So we do that. We come back again, take all the instructions from the whiteboard, and we change, get dressed, do this whole thing. And the next events were rifle PT and log PT, which began. I think those were about 2 or 3 hours a piece, but just lifting lifting telephone poles as a team, doing. I mean, you've seen it. You know that what the SEALs do on the beach with the log, and that's what we did for 2 or 3 hours. And at that time, the instructors were insane with rage. I would say that was log PT and rifle PT was the only time I saw instructors or cadre off their rockers, angry at all of us for simply being alive. So
it's like they look at you, they just hate you immensely.
They're pure hate, absolute hate.
So
yeah,
lovey-dovey.
Yeah. So you did. So I ended up doing log PT first, and from there, uh, there's no break. You run from there across the road, drinking water on your way. You line up and you start rifle PT, which I think the rifles, they weigh 7 or 8 pounds, and it's crazy how heavy 7 or 8 pounds, how fast a 7 or 8 pound dummy rifle can get.
It doesn't sound heavy, but every time I have to carry something that's like 5 pounds, 5 minutes later, I'm like, whoo. So yeah, I get it. Yeah.
It was incredible. So we do that. Instructors are going insane, and but after that, there was no more. I saw no yelling the rest of my time. Selection at the time was 21, 22 days, and it was 21 days. For 20 days, I never saw one cadre lose it.
Oh, good. Do you remember being intensely sore and just having to get up the next day and do it again when you're incredibly sore?
No, and here's where the pre-selection thing, for us, for the guys that I went through SOPC with, when we showed up and we start doing this stuff, it's all the same stuff that we had done in SOPC. The only thing was,
so you already had the muscles.
We already had that. Was already the physical stuff was, but what we weren't used to was the yelling and the not yelling, the not screaming, not in your face. We were used to the whiteboard directions. That was well, somewhat.
Yeah.
They didn't expose us to everything in SOPC, but no one was yelling, and it was, for the most part, selection. It's up to you. It is. They want to see how you operate by yourself. They want to see how you operate with very little instruction. They want to see how you operate at night by yourself, doing long distance land navigation. It's we did unknown distance, and we didn't know what the time standard was.
Wow! So just start running, but you don't know how long it's going to be. It makes sense because on missions you would have to do that. You run, you don't know.
No idea. Literally, the instruction was, starting point is here. What would they say? You'll know when it's over or something. They said something, and
seems really hard for me to start running and you don't know when you're going to stop running.
And you didn't know what the time standard was. Well,
how fast do you go? If it's 1 mile, you can go fast. If it's 10, I'm going to pace myself.
Yeah. And does this need to be a 6-minute mile? Does it need to be a 5:30 mile? Can it be an 8-minute mile? Which at the time was really, really slow, which would have been fantastic.
An 8-minute mile was slow.
Oh, that was, yeah. And but no one knew, and so all they said was, you'll know when it's over and do your best, and that was your instruction. And you did. You knew when it was over, which was way, way down the road. And I still to this day couldn't tell you what my time was. They didn't let us wear watches or anything like that.
You just ran for as long as they told you.
I ran for as hard as I could, for as long as I could, and hoped that was good enough to make it.
Wow.
So, and it was that way with long distance ruck marches.
What's a ruck march?
So the ruck march is So at selection, they were very specific about the amount of weight you had to have in your rucksack, which is basically a big ground military green, I guess. Yeah, green, the Alice pack. Uh, and at the time, I think it was 52 pounds without water, so no more, no less.
That
And
sounds hard.
before every ruck march and after every ruck march, your ruck was weighed. And if it didn't weigh 52 pounds, they just pull out their notebook and write a little whatever they wrote, roster number, what was did not have the correct weight, failure to follow instructions, blah blah blah, whatever they wrote.
Wow.
And so when you see that happen to guys, their rucks ended up weighing, they were 52 pounds at the start of the at the start of the ruck, and it was 49 and a half, when they finished.
So they
It's
threw
like,
some things out
yeah,
while they were
probably,
running.
or they had food in there and they ate it, and that ended up
Or
being,
water.
well,
And they drank
the
it.
water did not count towards
Oh,
the
okay.
weight of the rucksack, and they always had water cans along the way where you could
Oh,
stop and
that's
fill up
good.
your canteens and all that. So there was never ever a reason or an excuse for you to be under the weight that was required.
That's interesting.
So for carrying 52 pounds for an unknown distance, and not knowing how fast you needed to go, which is all stuff that we had already done in SOP C. But you look around and you see some of the other candidates just like, what? Because in the regular Army, and I want to be very clear, I'm not shaming the regular Army. I'm simply
The
stating the
training.
facts. Uh, it is very, very regimented. You will be here at this time, with this amount of weight, in this uniform. And it's usually be there 30 minutes prior to the 30 minutes prior to the 30 minute. And other than the weights, there was very, very little known about what you needed to do to be successful other than just do your best and you would be assessed on that level.
Hmm.
So, there was quite a bit. And one of the big ways that they assess your ability to make decisions on your own is via long distance land navigation, both during the day and at night. It's and when you initially started, you started off with a partner, which is always easier to have somebody else, about, well, should we do this? Is what, you know, but that was only for a couple days, and then after that, you were on your own. And I remember thinking, finally, I'm by myself and I can go, because my partner, God bless him, he had gotten out of the Navy. He was 36 or 37 years old and he looked 46 or 47. And I could tell he wasn't prepared to do the movements as fast as what I was prepared to do the movements. So that was a struggle for me. So once it got to where it was when I was on my own, it was great. I loved every bit of it. I was used to being in the woods by myself at night because I'd grown up hunting, getting in early in the morning, staying until late at night, hiking. I was just comfortable making decisions on my own. And and I would say during land navigation, uh, during the star, which is where you had to find 5 points within a certain period of time. And if you found all five of those points, then you got the check mark for that. Whereas if you didn't find all of your points, well, the next day, you had to find a certain number of points within a much less period. It got more
It got
difficult.
harder.
Yeah. And so I remember on my way to my last RV, my rendezvous point, I usually had my map tied off in plastic, hung around my neck, tucked in my BDU top, and and I remember looking down after going through a draw, which draws in North Carolina during the winter aren't nearly as bad as draws in Fort Bragg during the summer. Imagine just massive, huge vines and thickets and just worst environment imaginable. Lots of briar bushes, you name it. And so I just gone through one of those, and I come out and I'm getting ready to do a map check, a compass and map check. And I reached in there to get my map, and there was no map.
Oh no.
And I had moved a relatively significant, maybe 1,000 yards or so beyond that. And I remember thinking, no, it's got to be. I start backtracking. A little bit of the panic starts setting in, but I knew that I was getting close to my last point. I knew what direction it was in. I was just checking to make sure I was uh, on the the sand. Oh,
Is John
that's
back there?
John.
Is it
Yeah,
the sand?
I thought he said the sound.
No, the
Thanks, John.
sand.
So yeah, I can't find my map, nowhere. And I've got plenty of time. I'm actually coming in pretty earlier than I thought that I would get there. But I start looking around, and I think that is the first time I had my first real um,
Panic, maybe.
well, there was panic was setting in, but also my first, what I would like to say, maybe a fist fight with God. Uh, is this really what you want from me? You want me to go to Korea? That is your whole intent. And I ultimately ended up losing that fist fight, obviously.
So you couldn't make it. You didn't find it. It was gone.
I did not find the map. So God and I, we had our go around. Of course, he won. I calmed down and was just, hey, you know what direction you're supposed to go. You were simply doing a map check to make sure you're on the right path. And so at the rendezvous points, there's a huge stake in the ground right next to, and there's a tent with someone in there. And on top of those stakes, they have a chem light. And I remember just going in the direction I thought I was supposed to be going. I get kind of to the top of this hill, and I just stop and I just start scanning in front of me,
looking for a tent,
for anything that looked like a chem light, because it was still visible. They were still visible. It was dark enough. And I'm walking like back and forth trying to see, all the different angles, and I cannot find this chem light. I'm like, it's got to be in that direction. So I set my ruck down and I get out my canteen and I kind of squat down, and I put my my canteen up to take a drink. And as I'm looking, I'm like, is that a star? Like, it's awful low. And then I stand up real quick and I'm like,
yeah,
chem light. And I put the cap on, put my ruck back on, and just start running as fast as I can. And I show up and I get there, and I'm like, hey, roster number, blah blah blah. Here's my stuff. You're supposed to turn your map in or whatever it was. And I was like, I don't have my map. I lost it in the draw back there. He's like, no big deal. So I'm freaking out.
And they were okay with it.
About 2,000 yards, directly behind me, I'm back there in the woods having this freak out session with God. When it actually it wasn't a big deal.
But you don't know that part of the stress of training is you don't know whether it's going to be a thing that kicks you out or whether it'll be like, yeah, that's all right.
That's fair. I didn't know that, but the reassuring thing was when he was saying that, he wasn't pulling out his little notebook, which all of them did.
Right.
All of them had the notebook to, and he never did that.
And maybe he could have, and he knew you were more well qualified enough that it's just a one-time thing.
Yeah, it's possible.
Because they might have had that power to decide whether.
Oh yeah, he definitely could have written down, roster
and they probably taught you a really important lesson of when bad things happen, don't freak out. Just keep going. It's such a good life lesson.
Trust yourself.
And you're gonna mess up. You gotta, how you figure out, how you adjust from your mistake is so important. Not just, I messed up, everything's over, hopeless feelings. You just keep going.
Yeah, it's just keep going. Do your best. Just do your best. And so, I got to the end of that. And this is January. It's freezing out. That night, a snowstorm came in, shut everything down on Fort Bragg. And the next night, the following night, when the guys who didn't find all their points had to go out, they had to go out into this, I wouldn't say it's a blizzard, but it was coming down a lot, so, and of course the stress that was on them was, incredible. And the guys that had already found all their points, our reward for that was doing this unknown rucksack movement at night on the road. We actually got to do it on the road, but so it was actually really peaceful. I knew that I got through that part. That was one of the big events that really people self-select out of that, or they simply they're not good enough at making decisions on their own.
It seems very overwhelming Yes.
Yeah.
And the people that were in other military training, when it's such a group thing, so dictated every
Oh
single
yeah.
movement to
Yeah.
that seems very
Yeah.
different. I could see people struggling with that, me
Yeah.
included. I don't know. I'm
When
not
you're
very
under
good at
stress,
navigation.
when you're under stress, and at least there's a group of you together,
Right.
at least you're with someone. When you're in the middle of God's nowhere, North Carolina, in the middle of, if I don't do this, I'm going to Korea for the next 6 years. It's an emotional event out there. But yeah, so we do all that, uh, and that's in kind of in the latter phase of selection, and then you start team week, which is where you're actually with a team. Everyone gets assessed in their own way for things. That's where, they start to really look at your decision making. What's the best worst decision? Can you make that choice? Some people, well, no, this it's got to be like this, or else there's no. Well, you know, sometimes there is only the best worst decision, and I'll say that event happened so many times
Yeah.
later on in my career, and I always look back at selection and was so appreciative to be exposed so early to that.
Hmm.
Um, but it was, yeah, it was incredible. And the team week is very difficult too, physically very, very difficult. A lot of um, evolutions to go through that involve sandbags and heavy things that are, pretend to be nuclear waste, and if you drop it, or if
Oh,
you set it
wow.
if you set it
That
down,
makes
it
sense.
could
They train you
detonate.
that. Yeah, that seems pretty important.
There's very little sleep during that week, and so you have this.
Because they want to see how you can handle real world situations on little sleep, which I'm reading that book you gave me with the
Yeah.
special forces, and a lot of times they're not getting good sleep.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
makes sense. I'm really impressed with the training, honestly, hearing it from you with reading the book,
Mm.
where it goes a lot about the missions,
Yeah.
because it does seem like they are giving you tools to make your own best
Hmm.
decisions to keep you alive and to help the mission.
Hmm.
So I am
Yeah. And selection's not even really training.
right
That's just an assessment.
to see if you can do it. So
Do you
then you
have
can
the
be trained
Are
for
you
Green Beret.
trainable?
Yeah.
Do you have the potential to be trained, and be successful? And so after team week, and if you want to know more about team week, there's 100 videos on there that you can go and
What do they
watch
look up?
all this
Do they
stuff.
look up
Just
Team Week or Green Beret Team Week?
just
or?
look up Special Forces Assessment and Selection Team Week or what. And there's a ton of videos out there. Nothing's really a secret anymore. So we get to the end of that. It was Super Bowl. It was the night of the Super Bowl, and I remember they brought us all in there, and they hadn't told everyone who had been selected yet, but they brought in pizza and Coke and chips and all this stuff. And I was out within the first like 3 minutes. We got the pizza. I think I maybe ate half a piece, and I passed out.
You were
And
so
I
tired
was
from
so
that week.
exhausted. I
Wow.
wake up to the halftime, the Justin Timberlake, Janet Jackson
Oh, it was
halftime.
that one. I watched
Yeah,
that one.
yeah. And then after that, right back out.
That's so funny.
And so the next day, is when we do our evaluations. We meet with our cadre, the ones that had been following us on team week, and they go through everything with you, everything that you did in selection. They talked about this, your weaknesses, your strengths. Still didn't know whether you'd been selected yet. And one of my weaknesses was my physical ability, which was
Wow.
really, I'm like, what? Wait a second.
That's
You're
not the one
messing.
I would have picked.
Which is, I think, but come to find out later on, having had a really good friend of mine who was a cadre out there, uh, they just pull random things out of there, whether you were good at them or not. They just want to see what your
How you can
response is. How do
handle
you
it.
respond to that?
Yeah. So that one didn't
Yeah.
make sense, and maybe it wasn't even true.
Yeah.
But can you handle the criticism about yourself?
Yeah. Can you deal with that criticism? And so after
Were you
everyone
just
had
like,
been
what
there,
else could I have done? Were you just like thinking,
well,
what more?
what I was thinking was, man, if I screwed up on the physical portion, there is no way I'm getting selected, because everything, I mean,
Because the other stuff was
I
harder
was
for
like,
you.
how was I, I had been exposed to all that other stuff for such a small amount of time. And I felt like I picked it up on the first go around in SOP C, but it's like, well, well, maybe, okay. And I finally, you know what? I just got to a point where I was like, you know what? I don't care. I really don't care. I know that I did the best of my ability. I've given it everything I could possibly give it. If they want me, they want me. If they don't, there's going to be a unit that's going to get a really good soldier. And so after everyone had done their counseling, they stood everyone up in formation. Everyone that was left, they stood, and they still didn't tell us. Uh, there was no, hey, congratulations, no, you suck, you're terrible, you shouldn't even be in the army. It was simply the first sergeant standing up and saying, if we call your name, go over here. uh, well, okay. And so they call roster numbers, roster number 17, roster number 27, roster number 77, roster number 260. And they all went over, we all went over to the other side, or they actually all went over to the other side of the building. And all of us that were still standing in formation, I think there maybe were like, maybe 90 or 100 of us standing there. And they let us stand there for about 5 minutes. They just, they kind of walked around. I was like, doing this whole kind of like mind game or whatever. And then finally, the first sergeant turns around and he said, "Congratulations, you've been selected.
Wow.
From class blah blah blah, Special Forces Assessment and Selection." And literally just that, the entire formation did that.
Yeah.
And
so you weren't allowed to like go woohoo or anything. You just had to just
no one
stand there.
did. I mean, everyone was exhausted. It was more of just like, okay.
So they really kept you on high emotional alert for a long time.
For a long time. Yeah,
Interesting.
for a long time.
It's like every second of what they're doing is training for what you're going to have. Like
you're being assessed every minute.
Yes, so even just the selection process of who made it and who didn't is part of the training.
Yeah.
Can you handle it?
Yeah.
And if you couldn't handle waiting to find out, they're probably writing it down, looking like.
I still to this day don't. I honestly think they weren't doing anything up there but just piddling around, just making us wait. Honestly, that's what I think.
Yeah, maybe.
But yeah, that was, and a really important factor about Special Forces assessment and selection. And you hear this all the way through your SF career, and that is your reputation starts at selection, because everyone is assessing everyone else, watching how you're performing, what you're doing. And it truly is where your Special Forces, if you make it through the Q course, that's where your ID kind of starts.
So we're going to get more intense Special Forces training next time.
Yeah. So yeah, next one I'll moving from selection into the actual Special Forces qualification course.
Doing something different next week. We're just in the planning of it. We might do an interview with Tim Peck's father, who is a veteran. So that would be fascinating for you too.
Yeah.
So that might happen next Monday, and then we'll pick up in this story either next Monday or the week after that. We're still trying to figure out things, but it should be really interesting. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, the Q course is pretty, it's interesting.
And then what's the book I'm reading? I know it says Chaos in it.
Masters of Chaos.
Masters of Chaos. If you like what he's talking about, you would like that book. I'm halfway through it right now, and it's fascinating. If you want to hear what training is like, what missions are like, it's all about the Green Berets that have, since they were started. So you can hear more stories like this. It also helps me understand your point of view, because you say really interesting things to me, since your life is vastly different than mine, but we grew up in the same area. It's been really fascinating.
Yeah.
And I just love the mentalness of it, how mentally fit you had to be. And at the same point, saying you didn't know how to open up, you still knew how to accomplish these incredible things.
What I will say about that was the guys that were left after SOPC, those guys we were a family. I mean, we could trust. We knew who each person was at night walking in front of us, even if we didn't know if that's it. We were able to trust those guys in that group, and everywhere we went together, one or two of us were going to end up on the same team or something. And when we did, we had it. There was nothing that we couldn't do. At 100%.
How
Nothing
strong
we
you all
couldn't
were
do
together because you knew each other so well, your strengths and
Yep.
weaknesses, and that's really
Absolutely.
beautiful. I really like that.
Yeah.
You have a whole group of friends that you went through this experience with that nobody else had, and I bet that friendship's very cool.
Oh, it's very special.
That's nice.
Very special. Yeah.
Thanks all to everybody that's a veteran that's done this. Thank you so much. Thank you, Brian.
Oh, my pleasure.
It's been really wonderful. We're gonna do more shows. See how much time Brian has, because I want to get him on some more like local shows. We're gonna be doing some more stuff, so it'll be fun.
Yeah.
Please share this episode, and thank you for watching. And I'm doing a couple episodes tomorrow about Indiana and helping our government to be better. So you can check those out if you want tomorrow. And then I think so next Monday. We'll see you next Monday for something really exciting. Either more of this awesome stuff, or maybe an interview with another veteran. So
yeah. Great.
Thanks everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thanks for sharing.